Hello and welcome to episode 169 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago, I gave up my live stream and career as a radio presenter with one big regret. Never getting to interview my hero, the legendary singer, songwriter and musician, Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. Now, my latest podcast guest really needs no introduction, but heck, I'm going to give her one anyway. Carleen Anderson is my latest guest on the podcast, a genuine world-class artist. She's such a huge talent in her own right, and another to enter Paul Weller's orbit during the solo years, providing us with some very special moments on record and live. We're talking Wings of Speed on Stanley Road, the beautiful All Good Books on Illumination, Leafy Mysteries, also with Jocelyn Brown, that brilliant Hyde Park gig, amongst so many other live shows, Jules Holland, Studio 150 singing All Along the Watchtower and Birds, and that brilliant DVD gig at the Riverside Studios in Hammersmith. We're going to talk about that and so much more, including her brilliant solo career, her debut, True Spirit. We'll chat about Blessed Burden, her second album, which was co-produced with Paul Weller. We're going to hear all about her upbringing in Houston, Texas, where she was raised by her paternal grandparents during the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and stories of her family. And it's important you know this, right? She's the daughter of soul singer Vicki Anderson, stepdaughter of singer-songwriter Bobby Bird, and the goddaughter of James Brown. I mean, how many legends in one family, for goodness sake? We're going to hear all about her relocation to England in 1990 and the just by chance beginning of her professional career as the vocalist, composer, arranger, and recording artist for Young Disciples. These days, Carleen is focused on music storytelling theatre. Her most recent album, K Street Memorial, was nominated in 2018 for Jazz FM's Innovation of the Year. And since 2020, she's been working on what she describes as a blended roots opera with a regional premiere in Devon and a worldwide double album release scheduled for 2024. It's a real honor to have Carleen Anderson on the podcast. You're going to love this one. An epic, epic chat. Let's get into it. Carleen Anderson, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here, Dan.
I know so many people are going to be so excited to hear your story, honestly, because your life, your career in music, and I'm going to big you up, right? This incredible talent, the songwriting, the voice, the music, there's so much for us to dig into. So I'm really excited about having you on.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Bless you, bless you. Now, look, as it is the Paul Weller fan podcast, we should kick off because I wanted to ask you about something, because once you said that Paul was like a really supportive male mentor in an industry where that isn't really set up for women, let's be honest, but you said about the fact that he really treated you as an equal.
Yes, he always did from the beginning. I met him through Marco Nelson, who was the founder of the Young Disciples, producer and co-writer and so forth for the Young Disciples. And I hadn't heard of Paul before I moved to England. And Marco just said, I'm going off to a friend's, accompany me while I go to the friend. So he didn't even say he was introducing me to him. And when he introduced me to him, he just said, this is Paul. So I still didn't know.
Brilliant.
I had no clue. And Paul didn't act like, oh, you should know who I am or I'm this person or whatever. And they played some music in that. And so I still didn't know for a couple of weeks of hanging around, met Dee and the kids. And I think it might have been, we may have all been out at a club or something, and somebody played a tune of his, and somebody in the audience said, oh, that's Paul Weller. And I was like that one? So that was how it kind of came up. They weren't really keen, and I think part of it was a joke on the American. The American don't know much, like she doesn't know how to say Pernod. She says Pernod. And they'll go, oh, well, she's American, they just kind of let it, things like me saying, oh, isn't that cute? They have a town called York, just like our New York, but theirs is York, They wouldn't say anything. They just let it, for a long time. It took Mick Talbot finally was like, I think you'll find that York was here first. And, hence New York. Oh, is that the same for Jersey? Oh, and Birmingham too. Oh, so they played that. They let me figure stuff out long afterwards. But yeah, when we started working together, he never, ever treated me like you're the girl And so girls just do this and you wait until you're told to do that. When we were working together on my Blessed Burden album, he would never take over. He co-produced it with me, and he was adamant that he got a co-producer credit rather than producer credit. That was him making that. I would have, the way the industry works, him saying he was a producer would have been what would have been accepted. But he made it. He was adamant about making that distinction. When we were in the studio, and I would just, because I had worked with him in his band, and he would, lead his band, and I was used to following him in his band. And when he was working with me in my band, and I would look to him to start, and he would, no, it's not my band, you started. It's not my band, you count it off, and just as natural as this is, you take the reins, this is you. And you can do that. You play the piano, you can do that. Why don't you do that? Nothing to make it seem like he was doing me a favor. It made it seem like he was helping me out. He never made it seem like that. He always, and it is very rare in general, in life general, that happens between males and females and that type of thing. The way society is set up, that is very rare, but especially in an industry that is primarily dominated by males. That goes to say how much someone is confident in their own work. They don't have to put anybody else down or keep anybody out because their thing is already secure. It's not like anything I was going to do was ever going to impact or anything like that. But it wasn't in his, it wasn't in him. And there are plenty of people who are secure enough in what they do, and they still feel the need to have to bulldoze and push you back and push you around. So yeah, he always reminded me of one of my brothers and my stepfather, Bobby Bird. They're also musicians. My stepfather's passed now, but in their musicianship and in me participating in work that we did together, they always included me. So it wasn't like, oh, Tootie was my nickname. Tootie don't know what she's doing, or Tootie, just wait until we finish. It was never like that. It was just an automatic inclusion. And that's where I get the whole kind of brother thing from with Paul, because it reminded me of that kind of family type of support.
And with a voice like yours, I guess there's also a danger where you could just be seen as just a singer. I mean, that would be fine. Don't get me wrong. But actually, the fact that you are, skilled in production, you're skilled in, songwriting and crafts and musicianship and playing and stuff adds to that. But where does that come? Because that started at such a crazy young age, didn't it?
Yeah, I was really fortunate on my birth father's side of the family, very religious, and quite a few of them are musically inclined. So I was around music very early. It was everywhere. Hence the reason why I was there. I think I just picked it up because it was always around. I started playing piano by ear because my Juilliard scholar auntie, my birth father's older sister, was classically trained in opera singing, and she was also a much sought after gospel singer during the civil rights. My uncle, her older brother, who is the father of my cousin Jaleesa. Jaleesa is also she earned a name here in the UK.
I remember seeing you both together on Jules Holland, yeah.
Yes, that's right. And her father, my uncle, my dad's older brother, he was a very talented Hammond organ player. And so I would be sitting at the foot of these people growing up and listening to all of that music and watching it. So it became something that you did because it was there. And so that is where that comes from. They were arrangers by nature. They were music arrangers by nature. They were music theater producers by nature, not in the sense of the classical training. As such, my aunt did train, but with my grandfather and my uncles and my dad, this was something they did because they were doing it as a community service. And I was around it. And there was loads of them. There are loads of them. So, it just rubbed off.
Right. And then your mum was a well-known soul singer as well. So there's all this thing. I mean, goodness me. I mean, you had no choice, but that wasn't the route you wanted to go into, was it? That singing and music wasn't the initial career choice, right?
Not for a career. No. I mean, music was helpful for me as as medicine, as a way for me to get through life and, but I really was not interested in this one because I saw that side of it as a very young child. And it wasn't the circus I wanted to join. I was never one of them kids who wanted to run away and join the circus. It wasn't me. And I saw the circus very early on. I was like, nah, not me. And then also, I didn't want to be in a position which the industry requires you to be. You have to be judged all the time. And I wanted the music for my comfort, for my healing. Wasn't interested in whether anybody else liked it or, I had to do it a certain way so I could get this gig or get this. And that was just way too much. It's enough trouble just trying to get a job, to get a job and then you have to have the whole world like you in order to keep that job. It's like, well, I could be a bank clerk. That's fine. And I can come home and I can play my music and that'll be fine. But I was studying to be a music teacher at University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And Ronald Reagan came into office and he disallowed all of the programs that were with the arts. Governments do that all over the world. A lot of times you get new administrations in. The first thing to go is the arts. It takes a bit longer in some places. I mean, when I came here to England in 1990, they were still very much pro arts in the school. So it's only just now getting to that place here. But this was before my son was born that this was happening. And I had studied and I was in my last semester, had 3 more courses to go, just 1 more semester to go to graduate. And he came in that January and that called it all off. So just at that same time is when my birth mother and my stepfather were approached. Well, a couple of years after that, they were approached by Marco Nelson and Femi Williams to come out here to the UK to do some, what do you call those things? When they play the music and there's no band, but you just play and they, PA, is it PA?
Oh, yeah. Okay, right.
And that wasn't their thing. They were a live band thing. So to them, because I think Marco and Femi were around 21 or something at the time. And this was becoming the thing. This was, more than 30 years ago. It's always done now, but back then,
Yeah, it wasn't the thing, yeah.
They hadn't worked for a while. America isn't the kind of place that really bigs up their pioneers. They're very much, what have you done in the last 2 seconds?
Yeah.
So, to get any kind of work and to get any kind of interest, they were quite happy. And so they came over, I think in 88, first of all, and then they came back again and they wanted the full band. And Marco and Femi set it up so that Maceo Parker, Lynn Collins, Marva Whitney, Marva High. Several of my brothers were in the band as well. My brother Bart on organ, my brother Tony on drums, my godbrother Jerome on bass, and Bruno from Bruno Spite, who's in that famous SOS band. He was a guitarist. So yeah, we all came over and they needed a opening act. And all of these people were stars. Marva Whitney, Lynn Collins, Maceo Parker, Fred Wesley, Pee Wee Ellis. All these guys were stars.
Wow.
Stars in their own right. They all had their own individual careers. They all met through Uncle James, through the James Brown scenario, but they all had their own individual careers. And even though it was Bobby Bird and the James Brown All-Stars as what was being promoted, they all had their own individual career. So nobody wanted to open the show. and because they were all, and my stepfather, Papa Bird, was like, oh, baby girl, we need somebody to open the show because I can't get nobody else to open up the show. And we need you to open up the show. Basically, what he was saying is we need a no name. But
had you ever done like live performance in that way before?
I had worked for them in the background. Sometimes I opened the shows at little clubs that they did when I was like, I didn't grow up with them, you see. So it was just here and there. I'd be with them for a couple of months or something and they'd be on tour or something. Oh, we need somebody to sing this song, or we need some background vocals for this, or we need somebody to play piano for this, or something like that. I just kind of helped out, type of thing. And so I was used to that being my role where they were concerned, but I wasn't keen on, I hadn't been to that far away. And by now I'm a divorced mom. And so I wasn't very keen on leaving my child and all that. But Papa Bird is a very, very, very good man. He was very, very good to me. Him saying, I need you, baby girl, to do this, So, you do it. But I had done that kind of thing before, but not on that scale and not with those guys. I mean, that was like big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big deal to do it with my birth mother and Papa Bird and stuff, but that was more like helping the family out because they needed to get the gig to pay the next month's rent type of thing. It wasn't really a big promotional show like, London, it wasn't like that. So, it was the Chitlin Circuit. I don't know if you ever heard of the Chitlin Circuit.
No, I haven't, no.
Chitlin Circuit is a phrase that's used for the Southern clubs, Southern nightclubs, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and so forth. And they're usually rip-off merchants. The promoter leaves before the gig is over, nobody gets paid, and you have to just type, that kind of thing. So I was used to doing those kind of gigs, but nothing on this scale. And that is how it worked, that I came out and did this. And then Marco and Femi liked what I did. I opened the show with a cover of Denise Williams' Free. It was a song that I loved for ages, ever since it first came out, and had sung it on their shows, on Papa Bird's shows, loads of times. And it was something I knew. So it wasn't something I had to work to learn, so it wasn't some kind of anxiety thing. Oh, I've got to figure out how this goes. It was very familiar to me. The band knew it. It was a very popular tune and stuff. So, and Marco and Femi liked it, and they wanted me to come out, and they asked if I wrote music. That was the first thing they asked was, did I write music? And I said, did I write my own music? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, would you consider writing music for us? It wasn't initially, it was just for me to come out to write music for them and sing demos. They were working with DC Lee. And so they had their own kind of circle already. And my role, which is what I was used to, was to generate, arrange, put it together, and then maybe participate in the background. But it was never the first thing that I was going to be the lead singer. It wasn't until the record company heard the music and that, brought on a whole nother thing. We weren't planning any of this. All of this was just, and they were young, Marco and Femi, early 20s. And I was in my early 30s with a 10-year-old kid. So the dynamics of where we were in our lives were very, very different. But yeah, that's how it started.
And there was at the time, I think it's changed now, obviously, but at the time, there was definitely a perception in the mainstream music industry that past 30, I mean, Paul Weller said this himself, past 21, Paul used to say, you're done, right? You're washed up. So, but you're starting out your musical career in that way.
I was 33 when I moved here with a 10-year-old son and no kind of catalog to bounce off of to start in this. The whole thing I think was that made it possible is that it was off the back of the Bobby Bird, James Brown type of thing. So that respect for those people gave me a platform, but it also gave the young disciples a platform because it was, there's this team that's working together. There's this UK, USA team, and there's this kind of heritage connection. But I don't think either of us, Marco, Femi, or myself, thought that it was going to do any more than go past Dingwalls and the Feds. We do a little white label thing and play it at the clubs. That was it. No one was expecting that we would be gigging and things like that. That was, and we never did a tour or anything like that because it wasn't something that we were planning to do. It was all, lab room type But it was a time, though, the timing, I think, had a lot to do with it, because you had Soul to Soul, which had gone so big in America. And this was kind of off the back of that.
And then you got like acid jazz, because so much of the album is like, funk, soul, hip hop. We got some R&B, we got some gospel, even a bit of dub in there, right? It's like, it's a mixture of everything, but all those things colliding together in this brilliant Mercury nominated album. But that wasn't the expectation that this is going to take off in that way, right?
Wasn't the plan at all.
And most of it recorded at Solid Bonds, so Paul Weller HQ, the Style Council HQ. You got Mick Talbot there, Jacko Peak involved. So already it's all part of Weller's world, I guess, in a way.
Exactly. I mean, it was a great time. We got snowed in during the time that we were recording. And these guys, it was a different world for me, because I wasn't used to being that involved. And I certainly wasn't used to staying out front. I had to come out front sometimes. I was used to being out front when I was at church with my birth father's people and stuff. I was used to leading the choirs and leading that kind of thing. But that was more on a public service type of thing. This was very different. This was a whole different world. I was used to seeing my birth mother and my stepfather and Uncle James and them having that kind of height and witnessing it from the side of the stage, or when I was younger, just sitting by the speakers or something like that. But I never saw myself in that. So to be in an environment where a Solid Bond, I don't know if you ever went to it in Marble Studio. It was really lovely. I don't know if it's even still there anymore. It was really lovely. And I had been in a couple of studios to record for people like Betty Wright and stuff when I was a teenager and that. But they weren't like Solid Bond. Solid Bond was lovely. It was really big, high ceilings and lots of space. The control room could have been an apartment.
It probably is now.
Everything was really big, lovely, kind of like restaurant cafeteria where you could eat and stuff, but everything was on site. Yes. So you never had to leave, really, until you were going home. So that is basically what we did. We got there and we worked, and we would work until sunrise, day in and day out. And when Paul came in and he worked on the album, he did some parts and stuff on the album. That whole kind of collaborative spirit that was brought in, because they did bring in lots of people, different people from the UK, but also if people were coming in from America on tour and stuff, they would, could you come? We had the JB horn players, Fred Wesley, Pee Wee Ellis, and Maceo play on one of the tunes that I wrote. And so that whole kind of collaborative spirit was something that I was very new to in the whole kind of music thing. And to be a part of that was very exciting. It was new. It was like going to university, like first day of university, and you're finding out where all the classes are and where everybody's meeting and all that kind of stuff. But for them, even though it was newer to them than it was to Paul, they had been hanging around it for a while. So these guys knew Paul, obviously, and Paul was very welcoming to them. I don't know how long before I met them, but they were used to being in that environment. Yeah, so it was great to be able to have that advantage. It was like Solid Bond was a second home. That was where you went every day for the whole of the summer of probably 1990, that whole of that summer. Actually, it would have gone on for longer than that because we got snowed in that winter. So maybe about 9-10 months.
Like I say, that when the album comes out, I mean, it's a huge, big critical success, big commercial success. So it takes you to another level, I guess. And because it was this project that was kind of like the lab project that you mentioned, the intention was never that this would be a band you're touring in that way and whatever. So was that then the next thought was, okay, well, I'm guessing that was because you get signed to Virgin Records, right? So the next thought is solo artist.
It wasn't a thought of mine.
She had no choice.
It was like it's strange because I could have never planned this, I don't think. I don't think that I could have put this in motion myself, like thinking it and thinking, oh, I'll do this and that. And if I had never been approached by the record company, I could have easily said, okay, it's been a nice visit. Because initially that's what it was supposed to be. I had a 6-month visa.
Right.
That was what I was going to do. I was going to come here, write this music for them who were going to do their own stuff. And it just snowballed into this thing. And then the guys were not keen on being on touring and stuff. The focus was the lab and going to the club and playing the music. that was their groove. That's where they, wanted to stay. That would have been fine with me, except that we got into this situation to where the record company was approaching me to do this, to go solo. And I have a child. For much of what I was doing with the Young Disciples, it was out of what I was used to doing with family. It's not something that I didn't sit down with anybody and say, okay, so this is going to be what I earn for this. And most of the time it's, room and board. That's
yep.
That's it. And you don't expect anything other than that. That's how a family kind of works. It's just everybody pitches in, and as long as you're fed and you're clothed and you're housed, I didn't need much else than that. Needed my child to be fed and clothed and a roof over our heads. You need bus money to get back and forth, that kind of stuff. So it wasn't something, however, being somewhere where I wasn't home, I didn't have a way to get a job to earn anything beyond that. This offer became something more necessary for me to choose. And that was definitely a sore point to have to make that kind of decision, because it meant that I was going to have to cut from there. But when you're offered work and you're offered a salary and you're offered something for where you can see, as the mom of a child, I can now get a place for my child, have to sleep on somebody's couch all the time. I can actually have a key that goes into my place and see about my child's daily well-being beyond that becomes more of a necessity. I was not prepared for all of what that meant, because being a solo artist meant that, I got a little bit of that when it was the Young Disciples, because I was pushed out front. But I still had my anchors, and Marco and Femi were very forward workers. So it was a lot of stuff that I didn't have to confront head on. I kind of, they were my brothers. So, when you're the sister with brothers, and I have a lot of brothers, and so I'm used to my brothers looking out for me. I'm used to them sort of going into the room first, checking to make sure everything's safe, and then I can come in, that type of vibe. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't have to deal with, even though I had to deal with press and you take your photo sessions and all that kind of stuff. But it was a lot of stuff, the harder stuff, that they kind of buffered me from. And so when I went solo, it was like, whoa, because there was no more protection.
Suddenly you're isolated. It's you, right?
Yeah. That was a lot. But, I wasn't a young child, you know what I mean? I was in my mid-30s by then, so I had to figure it out. It was a job that I had to do. And I have to be grateful that I had that, because none of this was what I was planning to happen. And it provided a lot for me to have for my child and to have a life itself. So it was hard work. But, people have much harder things to cope with. So,
well, look, there's this. I've got it here. Look, this vinyl was the first album. Here we are.
Oh, long time ago, girl.
Look at that. True Spirit. So this was released 1993, 94. It's so interesting reading the sleeve notes again, because the amount of people who have been on this podcast, I don't think Weller plays on it, but we had Nigel Sweeney for getting my sound out to the public. Nigel's been on. Spanner has been on. We've got Brendan Lynch, the Lively Up Yourself revival of live sound recordings, you say. Max Beasley had played on this. He's been on the podcast.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Around this time, so whilst you were recording that, there were obviously lots of Weller connections, and Paul had been out of the wilderness a little bit. And actually, when you were snowed in was when he wrote Into Tomorrow. I think he was in the back studio. You were in the main studio, hilariously, because I've heard about from Brendan about the snowed in story. But obviously, around this time, you're all spending time with each other, and Paul's back on top. We've had Wildwood, where he's recording Stanley Road, and we'll talk about Wings of Speed in a sec, because that's just one of my favorite all-time songs. It's amazing. But there was this little traffic cover on the sleeve notes. It says something like it was recorded on a drunken evening at Comfort's Place, and but you don't remember this drunken evening, but you're on the sleeve notes.
I may be on the sleeve notes for Comfort's Place, but this song Traffic, I haven't heard the actual song Traffic. You sent a couple of
it's the feeling all. So the band with Traffic, the song was Feeling All Right was the song. It was a B-side on a B-side on Above the Clouds.
Feeling All Right. I remember singing on that, but A Drunken Night at Comfort's Place, they might have been, Because that's what the boys did. You know? That's what the boys did. The whole kind of way that, and again, it's this kind of family pitch in type of thing. You know how it is when family goes and you setting the table. So somebody puts out the plate, somebody puts out the glasses, somebody, you know, everybody has a little job to do type of thing. So my role was often, check out in, it's time for, we need her to do this, da-da-da-da. So I would just come in and do a bit and then leave type of thing. It could have been, but I don't remember. I mean, the boys were hardcore. You know what I mean? They could go for a while, and I don't have that kind of constitution. And also, my voice would never last being drunk and singing. However, later on, when we get into another tune that you said you're going to bring out, I'll tell you a graduation into that kind of
okay.
Whatever. But yeah, I do remember now feeling all right. Traffic threw me because I don't know the titles, and there's a lot of things, a lot of music I don't know the title of it, and then I hear it and I go, oh, that tune.
Yeah.
Noel Gallagher stopped by. I don't think he played on it, and I think some journalists came by. But again, I was the only girl, so, you know, and I have a lot of brothers, and I'm usually the only girl in the situation. And I wasn't never one of those, because sometimes when you're the only girl and you have a lot of brothers, you learn to fight. And so you hang out with your brothers because you can hang out with them because they teach you. But I was never that girl. I was always the girl that time for Tootie to go to bed type of
Which sounds like you're professional, Carleen, to be fair. I think that's what you're saying. This is important to you. You're not going to...
Well, I knew my limitations, and I didn't have the constitution to be able to then work.
Now, I mentioned the Jules Holland. So around this, that launch of that album, True Spirit, would have been the summer of, I think it was 1994, was the first appearance of Jules Holland. And there have been many. And it was the final show of the series. I don't know if you can remember this. And on the lineup, we had Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash.
I remember that very well.
Mazzy Star and Pop Staples, for goodness sake. I mean, this is just ridiculous. What a lineup. And you, obviously, what a lineup.
And I sang with Pops and June Carter and Johnny Cash in Will the Circle Be Broken? They filmed that. That was one of the most, for a lot of reasons, because those people, between Pop Staples and Johnny Cash and his wife, and that whole kind of country and Western and blues and gospel kind of thing. And to be in the midst of that, because for me, they were royalty that I would have grown up listening to. And to be on the same stage with them, you know, to be on the stage with Mavis Staples' daddy, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
wow,
Johnny Cash, you know what I mean? The Man in Black. That was a huge, big deal for me. I was just constantly like this with all of them, you know? But yeah, that was a miraculous thing. And that was also because of Weller, because Weller didn't have to push me out front like that to make those kind of things happen, because, you know, there's loads of singers. There could have been loads of different people that could have been in those scenarios, you know. So again, you know, that's another example of him providing a platform and a booster type of thing. And it was great to be in the midst of that. Yeah, I think Jaleesa was on there as well.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. The wonderful thing then, when I said about it, immediately you looked, and immediately I could tell you were transported back there. Isn't that wonderful? Like, I could see you were like, oh yeah, reliving that moment.
I was 5 years old, man.
Now let's talk Paul Weller, Stanley Road. So there were a number of tracks that you back in vocals, duets with Paul in a way on some of the songs. So Wings of Speed is a particular favourite. We've got Mickey Talbot, we've got Joy Hawley on cello. What are your memories of the Stanley Road time in those sessions? Because you also sang on the bit on The Changing Man, but I think you did that separately to Dr. Robert and Steve Craddock. On Out of the Sinking, what were your memories of that time?
Okay, remind me, because it was a very long time ago. Remind me what studio, was that at Solibon? Did we do it at Solibon?
No, that would have been it's the Manor in Oxfordshire.
Okay. Back then, residential studios were quite popular. And so there were several that Paul had booked over the years. And I'm trying to remember which one of those this was, but I think I have it in mind. The Manor, which one this was. Craddock was there, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Steve White?
Yeah, Steve White would have been through all of those times. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we stayed over and he started, what year was that?
That would have been, well, the album was out 95, so it would have been between 94.
So it was around the same time that I was recording Blessed Burden. So those kind of things overlap. But yeah, I mean, again, we worked all day long. The guys, you kind of started late because they stayed up after work, so, but we did work late, so we would tend to work until daylight. And then, it would be a late start to begin to have breakfast, but you'd have people in the residential cooks and so forth like that. So it kept you going. And I love the atmosphere of a residential studio. One is less laboratory type. You're creating in an atmosphere of nature and that. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about recording and producing in that atmosphere. What was the song you said?
Wings of Speed is the album closer, and it's Lou and Paul really kind of duetting.
Yeah. The way Paul would like to work with, if we were recording vocals together, he wanted us to be doing it at the same time, to be recording it at the same time.
Live together, opposite each other.
Yeah. That way, and it worked because you'll be more in sync with each other. You can go by ear, but his way of wanting to do that. It would have been Brandon Lynch.
Yeah.
That was producing it.
How much do you remember about the song? Because you would have performed that live with Paul, the Wings of Speed song.
Yeah, I remember more of the live than I do the studio, to be honest, because again, for me, studio recording is more piecemeal. It's not a kind of organic type of thing. And I'm from the school of organic type of, and everything is done, everybody at the same time. And that's your lot. You don't get to go back and fix it. That's what you have type of thing. I do remember quite a few performances with him, live performances when I would tour and stuff with him.
And were there times where you went on the road for the whole tour, or was it just because I've got like the DVD of Hyde Park. We'll talk Studio 150 and that live performance in a sec, but I wasn't sure if they were one-offs versus actually you were there for the whole tour.
I did do some whole tours for him, some UK tours. I didn't go out of the country, but I did do UK tours with him during that period, during that same time, because it, like I said, it overlapped with Blessed Burden. So I was able to open up the show with some of my tunes, and Paul would play on my show on the opening bits and stuff. That was another booster that he did. And then I would come out on his show on the tunes that I had recorded with him and stuff for his work and stuff like that. That was quite good. It was quite a bit of a difference because Mick Talbot's son, Mick and his wife are very comical, and Gene is just like them. He's just so funny, but a very deadpan kind of comedy. He would, and he made the remark of he had seen one of the shows. I forget which one he saw, but he was like, Carleen comes out and her show is because this is me on the piano, my thing. But my music is quite delicate,
sensitive.
Yeah. And then he says, and then Paul comes out there, so it was a very different dynamic. I had my little circle. It wasn't like opening a show for someone and you have the whole stage to yourself to present it. I had a little sort of like a jazz circle. And that was mainly so that, Paul's stuff was set up so that his stuff didn't have to be moved, because that is quite annoying. And you don't always get to have that option as far as, even when you're the headliner, they'll move you. And I hate it when they do that. When you move your stuff, you're the headliner and they move your stuff and then they have to move it back up and then everything is out of place. But you're on a Paul Weller tour. It's Paul Weller's stuff. So his stuff gonna stay where it is. You just kind of move into a little bit of it. But hey, it was still fine. I'm playing to these big audiences that I would have never had the opportunity to play for. But yeah, he made that thing. It was funny the way he said it. And then Paul comes out with so it was a very, very different kind of situation. But again, I learned so much working in that environment, opening up for somebody in a more, even though it was still family-esque, it was a lot more, the audiences were bigger, huge audiences. And that was before I did my little stint with the brand new Heavies. So I wasn't used to that kind of, the stadiums and the arenas and things like that. I wasn't used to walking on those big stages and having to perform. So, and then also in performing those songs, just sort of like with Wings of Speed, because it's sort of spiritual type of tune, it allowed me to draw on my gospel roots, performing it live. And Paul was very encouraging of that. He wasn't like, some people in this industry, they tend to want to kind of water that aspect out of things because it's a bit too raw for commercial aspects. So, want a bit more pristine. Paul was full on for that kind of thing. And it allowed me to bring my roots with me into this completely different arena. He welcomed that. So it was great.
When we talk about live performance, I should mention the Hyde Park gig. So this would have been around Illumination.
Jocelyn.
Yeah, Jocelyn Brown. We've got the DVD, so we can relive this experience, right? Yeah. And so, I mean, that was an epic gig.
It's just a sea of people. That was fun. Fun. Jocelyn's a hoot.
I bet.
So funny. She's so funny.
But these voices together, I mean, sometimes you're just like, get off the stage, Weller. I just want to hear these two.
Yeah, it was so much fun. And we had, because what's this guy's name? There was a guest there. Oh, what's the...
Kelly Jones was on that one.
Yeah.
Stereophonics, yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking of the rehearsals before then.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was a real fun time. That was a real fun time. Yeah.
Because Yolanda Charles has been on the podcast, who played on, we'll talk Blessed Burden's Sake, which, your second solo album, which Yolanda played on amongst lots of other Weller alumni, as I say. But she'd been on the podcast and she was talking about rehearsals, as you mentioned them, and the fact they were pretty full on, like it was almost like the entire gig, right?
They were. I mean, sidebar, when I met Yolanda and was spending time with her through the Weller gigs and then to when she was working with me on my work, I used to always say, and Yolanda's a good 10 years at least younger than I am, mind. And I would always say, I want to be just like Yolanda when I grow up. Because she was just like so fearless. And, a woman playing bass, one of the instruments that's supposed to be totally a guy's thing, and her being so masterful at it, and her having no kind of, like I said, I was more the little sister, even though I was older than these people. Because of my size, I was always pretty much relegated as the kind of little sister you protect type of thing. Whereas Yolanda's this Amazon queen type of person. And so, she took care of herself. She would go we'd be at festivals and things, and she would never wait for the girls' bathroom, because girls' line would always be long and the guys' line would never be. And she'd be going, pull my hair, let's go to the toilet. It's the guys. She said, nobody's in there and I'm not waiting and we've got to get on stage. So let's go. She had no kind of, she's just, obviously an amazing artist, but just fearless. Yeah. And the rehearsals they were intense. But I love that because I see that as work. I come from that kind of thing of you hammering it out and you getting it right, because you don't have a second chance on stage. You cannot go back and fix it. So you have to. And I am a firm believer. Not a lot, but some people aren't as keen with rehearsals, but I don't mind them. And I don't mind the grueling aspect of them. And I don't mind that you have to keep going over things over and over again, because again, I come from that stock. Uncle James and my Papa Bird, they were very strict about rehearsals and they would last all day long. And it's hard for me to get people to I forget to go to lunch or to do anything. And then they'll go, Carleen, can we have lunch now? It's like, well, what time is it? 3. Oh, all right. Well, y'all can go eat. I'll just stay here and y'all, when y'all get back, that type of thing. Yeah, like I said, I like that kind of energy. And Paul is from the time that I was working with him, very much the taskmaster. That to me meant you just had to get it right.
Yeah, and you're getting better, aren't you? That you're getting match fit, that chemistry is being built and all that. Yeah, exactly. One final question about life on the road with the Wellers. So Kenny Wheeler has been on the podcast. John Weller has obviously been talked about a lot on the podcast. Did you ever enter the card school? Would you have been part of that on tour?
Yeah, I definitely stayed away. I'd sometimes be in the vicinity where a table would be set up, but I would skirt around that purposely. Definitely skirt around that purposely. For me, I don't know if, other women might have joined in at some time or another, but it was never it was very much not a bad thing, but it was a boys thing. You know what I mean? It was like, and you'd have to, and I'm not as tough as that. You'd have to be thick-skinned, very thick-skinned to hang in that kind of thing. And, my whole kind of thing was different than that. But, Kenny and John were very much protective of Paul. At the same time, they were respectful of what Paul was respectful of. So that kept me in a safe place. I was the kind of person that my birth mother was a card player. I'm too safe as my nature. So I got kicked out of card games early on. I was her partner and I got really told off because she lost the game and I was her partner and she saw my hand and I had a winning hand.
Oh, no.
She was like, why didn't you play it? I was like, I was saving it. Really not my forte.
Now let's talk Blessed Burdens. This was released 1998. So like you say, this all collides with you on the road with Paul, and his Heavy Soul album's been out. And so much of that album has like I say, Weller alumni, Yolanda, Steve White, Matt Dayton, we talked about, the brilliant Ernie McCone, who's been on the podcast, Mickey Talbot, Steve Craddock, Brendan Lynch involved. But at the time, I remember watching TFI Friday, which I was such a massive fan of. Chris Evans, I absolutely adored. Your version of Maybe I'm Amazed, even this is a Paul Weller podcast, I think that could even be my favourite song of all time, Maybe I'm Amazed. So to see you do that version, I was just like, oh my God, this is absolutely incredible on TFI. And that obviously part of the album, but we had Marco on bass, you had Mick Talbot on keys, on the album you got Weller and Craddock on guitars as well. And like you say, Paul co-producing with you, but your project, your second solo album, because there's a mixture of your songs, but then there's the cover, like I say, Maybe I'm Amazed. How did you select those covers? Was that a conversation with Paul? Because there was a Van Morrison cover as well.
Actually, the covers came from Marco Nelson, his suggestion. I would have heard of Maybe I'm Amazed in passing as a kid, but I was like 10 or so when it came out, and it was after the Beatles and that whole kind of interlude thing, and you were kind of like picking sides.
Yeah.
Type of stuff. And so it hadn't sat with me to listen to and lived with, but I remembered it from 2 decades before and stuff. And he said, Marco said, I want to play you this tune, and it's like, I think you really sing this song. And I was like, don't know. And then Paul piped in his, yeah, he would, that kind of thing. I was like, I don't know. One, I'm very much a storyteller. So Maybe I'm Amazed is a song about a person who is loved and they are amazed that they're loved, but they recognize that they're loved in a romantic type of sense. I had no clue of what that was like. So to make it believable, that was like, I don't know how I can make this work. I could do the other one.
The Van Morrison song. Who was that masked man?
Yeah, because it was sad and somber and woe is me type of thing. So that I knew and that I could deliver. But Maybe I'm Amazed. It was just so much awestruck joy. And I was like, well, I mean, as a mom, I knew that kind, but this song was talking about romantic. I was like, I don't know how to pull anything out from this. I don't have any kind of reference to it. So when we were in the studio, this was a London studio. I see the studio, but I can't remember the name of the studio. It was a smaller place though, but I do remember seeing us all in the room. So I'm recording the bit. So I've got my herbal tea. I've got my licorice tea, and I'm nearly in tears because I can't feel it. I could sing it. Technically, I could sing it, but I couldn't feel it. And Paul could hear it in my voice. in my speaking voice when I saw, I got to do that part again, that type of thing. He could hear it in my voice that I was near the breaking point of I can't do this. I can't make this happen. And it's a different type of song because it demands a lot of my vocals. I'm a more delicate. I can sing the growl in that. Technically, I can get there, but it's not my first place to go when I'm singing. And Maybe I'm Amazed demands a lot of that pure rock and soul. Just, baby, I'm just like, whoa, okay. That's a lot for me to pull out of my hat. I'm in the vocal booth and they're in the, so it's Paul, the guitarist, Crispin Taylor on drums. He's from, they had another group that they were in.
He was part of Push, wasn't he? He was with Jack.
Push. And before then, I think Galliano as well. But yeah, it was that. And all of those guys were in the live room, and I was in a vocal booth off to myself, more than just the little separators. It was an actual room, proper big vocal booth room. Yeah, so Paul could hear in my voice that I was kind of like shaky. Not shaky, but, I don't know, that kind of thing. And he said, so what you drinking? I was like, my tea, my herbal tea, my licorice tea. Have a little bit of this. And a little bit of this was Captain Morgan.
Does he have a hip flask?
No, whole bottle of Captain Morgan. I'm telling you, these guys were hardcore. So, we ain't in the nighttime yet, so it's early. And so he's like, bring your cup out here. He put a bit in there. I was like, wait, no. So with my tea, it just evaporated. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like I was tasting the Captain Morgan as such. It added flavor to it. And then I was gone. Maybe I'm amazed. I was definitely gone. And from then on, because Maybe I'm Amazed caused me so much emotional duress to pull it out of me, because I was having to pull something out of me that I had no attachment to. I couldn't reach for anything. So I had to build something inside of me to make that happen. I had to think of a story that I never lived, type of thing. So from then on, that meant when I never did it in the studio except for that song, but for live from then on, that really helped with my nerves. And I never got drunk on stage. I could drink a lot in my tea of Captain Morgan, but I got used to it on stage because I started then doing solo gigs on my own at Ronnie Scott's and so forth. And I get so nervous with being in these environments, feeling like, whoa, this is a lot to pull out. And it helped me I forgot about being scared. And because I was so nervous, it absorbed everything. I couldn't drink that much if I was off stage. Never was able to do it. And I asked the doctor at, your regular checkups and stuff. It's like, why is it that I can drink on stage and I don't get drunk, but I cannot drink that much at all when I'm off stage? And she says, it's your nerves. They just absorb it. It's a different kind of thing. When you're recreationally, it leaves it different. So that's how that happened. And we recorded it. One bit of it that was really annoying because by now, the guy's a bit toasty. All the guys are a bit toasty, and it's like, I knew, myself and Mick Talbot knew, according to how I remember it, on the second take, that the second take was it. But, the guys it was just this one song that we had booked the studio for to be done. So the studio was booked for the day. So as far as the guys are concerned, it's just play it and play it and play it and play it. So we had it 25 times.
25 times.
And I knew on take two that take two was the most I was going to be able to do, as in bringing it. And anything else was going to be a poor comparison. But, they were gone and they wanted to keep doing it and I kept doing it. And by now I'm drinking, you see. So I've got the energy to do it, but I knew my passion was in take two. And Mick said that as well. As soon as the second take, he said, that's the take. And I was like, you probably got some more in you. You probably got some more takes in you. Let's do another one. Oh, you gonna do some more? And then Brandon would go, let's do a couple more, just so we could have something just for saving safety. Let's do another one for safety. It's like, how safe do you need to be? I said, we did all of that. And by now, it's like, I'm done. And then Paul goes, I think take two isn't right. You did say.
To be fair, Carleen, if I had you in the studio and I was co-producing with you, I think I'd have done the same thing just to hear you sing over and over again, to be fair.
So, yeah.
I find that so interesting, the storytelling element. And Paul talks about this, of why he doesn't play some of the jam songs and the Style Council. Like, that connection isn't there with those songs, those lyrics he wrote as like an 18, 19-year-old kid. But the storytelling aspect's always been important to you, and the love of theatre, which is what I want to talk to you about next, and the current projects and the most recent projects, has been a shift away from the musical mainstream, if for want of a better expression, right? Because this love of the visuals and the love of performance is really important to you. Always has been, right?
Yeah. It's storytelling for me, because I being raised by my birth father's parents, and my birth father's father was the local pastor, and he came from, these people were poor, so they didn't have any money to go for entertainment or anything like that. He was born in the late 1800s, so becoming an adult in the early 1900s, at the height of vaudeville and that whole kind of theater. And back when theater was for poor people, your three-penny opera-esque type things, whole families would put 2 or 3 pennies together so that everybody could go out and have this kind of entertainment. So he was used to that kind of storytelling. And with people who didn't have money to go to the theater, he created this in his church. Only difference is that the stories were biblical. So they were all Bible stories. And my job as a 7-year-old, as his 7-year-old apprentice, was to make these Bible stories, bring music to these Bible stories for the congregation, and all of the congregation participated. Sometimes they were audience members, sometimes they were the characters in the different Bible stories. And so I have that in me from that.
I love this. So like, you're 7 years old.
Yeah, but for my culture, and I'm talking about a kind of 7 or 8 block radius, those people in that particular neighborhood, and that included my birth mother's family, because they were also members of my birth father's church. So you had this kind of tribe kind of thing. And it's just like in those kind of communities or places where kids start doing things at 3 or 4 years old because they got to help out the family type of thing. Yeah. So it doesn't really seem young to the community, because as soon as you can start doing stuff,
you'll be useful. Yeah,
exactly. So it seems that way in the bigger world, because people have different ways of going about their lives. But yeah, by then 7 was probably old. You know what I mean? As far as, I was 7 years old and I was directing a choir whose choir members were 11 to 18 years old. But they didn't see me as a 7-year-old as such. I was the preacher's daughter, granddaughter, but, I was raised as his daughter. And I had learned from these people. So I was delivering the work that needed to be done. And I had to create these music stories so that it created what my grandfather did in following in his footsteps of creating these stories to help people get through the next week. Because you'll have these people who are all sorts of, you've got society situations first off, and then their personal things that have to. And in church, it's not a show. It's a sharing of sorts. But you're storytelling, and you're doing it to uplift people's spirits. And that's what I love about the theater, that kind of coming together to tell a story, so that when people, the general feeling in church when I was growing up is when people left church, they felt good enough inside themselves that they could face the next week.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
There's loads of stuff that they're going to have to deal with, but they've got this memory in their mind. They've got this uplift in their spirit from having these different stories told, because the Bible is only telling human stories. in a different kind of way, of the way that people thought at that time. But it's basically human stories, and people relate to those stories because they can see their lives in it. Oh yeah, I know somebody like Kane, that kind of stuff, And so you give them that kind of thing, and that's what I grew up with, and that's what I always wanted from 3 years old, when my auntie, who was a Juilliard scholar and an opera singer and a gospel singer, she blended those two together. And it was in my mind to think, because it wasn't being done, I didn't see it anywhere else other than my grandfather's church. None of the other churches were doing it. I spoke to my birth father in my older years, my 40s or something, when he came to visit me here in England. And I was telling him about that. And he was like, oh, was Dad still doing that? Because he left when he was quite young as a teenager. So he got my mama pregnant. But anyway, I was saying to him about how, I was doing these shows with Daddy Honey, is what I call my grandfather. I was doing these shows with Daddy Honey. He was like, was Dad still doing that? And I was like, yeah. And that was the way the wider community saw it, as in that he was just really stayed in his kind of Victorian mindset, that end of late 19th century, early 20th century way of delivering art. That was where his mindset was. And my auntie was kind of in that same thing, except that she blended in a bit more with her gospel and opera. She blended in a bit of Sam Cooke and stuff, but she had to be a bit more inventive with it, because the church was very much, if it wasn't classical music or gospel music, it was the devil's music. She had to be kind of careful of how she blended that in. But watching that and seeing all of these different types of genres being blended together is where this comes from for me in the thing that I'm doing now.
The current project is a futuristic approach to opera, is how you describe it. I love how this goes full circle, how what you're doing now is all inspired by your upbringing, by your aunt, by Daddy Honey that you mentioned there. This love of performance comes from there. Take me through how this develops as a youngster then. So, as a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, you mentioned, what about into your teens, so 13, 14?
It began at 3 and then with my aunt, and then 7 with my grandfather, me being an apprentice and having this job of putting these musics together. By the time I was 14, I was interacting more with my birth mother and my stepfather. My grandfather had died by then. My grandmother, my birth father's mom, she had spent a lifetime with him. My aunt had died. So there was a lot of tragedy that everybody was trying to navigate. And so by the time I was 14, I was being introduced to soul music and funk music. I had heard it on the radio in passing and stuff, but it wasn't something that was allowed in my grandfather's house at all. So it was something I would have had to hear if somebody had a transistor radio walking down the street and you'd hear it, or if you went to a friend's house and they were playing, oh, this is fun. But 3-5 minutes tops that you were getting. So, and when my birth mother and my stepfather would come into town and I would go and see the James Brown show, I would get a sense of it. But again, you're talking moments in time. It's sort of like going to the circus. You get a little bit of it, but it ain't your whole life. But to be in the midst of that, to have all of that come together, because even with Uncle James shows, he still had a bit of vaudeville in those early shows. There were still skits. It was still the whole kind of review type of thing. It was very much da 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 da. You had a lot of that. You got the comedian coming on, you got the dancers coming on, you got these little skits of little storylines coming on. Then you have the main event, which was him. So you still had all of those bits together, and that was still around my 6th, 7th, 8th year of life. So by the time I was 14, my stepfather was on his own. He was doing his own thing. And I'm a teenager now. You're in school, so you hear this stuff all the time. And you still had drama in school. They were still promoting drama and music drama and that. So it was very much building. But the thoughts that I have as a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old in those years, that kind of thing was built in my mind. That kind of stuff had pretty much been put on the back burner in my mind of something that could possibly happen because it wasn't there. There wasn't a platform there that I could see where it could go to. I wanted to do it when I was that age, but not wanted to do it. I imagined it. I had the visuals of something like that happening, like what I saw happening would come up in my brain then, but it didn't take form until I was in my, where are we now? We're 2023. So yeah, mid-50s.
That's incredible, isn't it?
But it took a very long time before it, and all because the way the industry went. Once I was dropped from my record company and then went independent, that was at the turn of the century, 2001, 2002. It started to come to me to just do story songs. I wanted to dedicate something to my grandparents. You know, they weren't famous, so they don't get much of a mention in the industry for their influence. But I understand why people lean towards the celebrity aspect of my heritage. The impact of that is a sort of an ingredient as opposed to the foundation for my grandparents. So I wanted to have something dedicated to them to show that, to create something. And I thought at that time, once I did that, that was Alberta's granddaughter. I thought, okay, I've done that and that'll be it. But people in the industry, my colleagues in that liked it. And they encouraged me to go on further. And that's how it just kind of different people that I started working with in the theater. Julian Joseph, who is a jazz pianist and a composer, and he's done operas and things as well. And I started getting asked to participate in these things. The BBC would invite me to do things. And that opened that whole up. And it was sort of like something that had been dormant for so long. It's like, oh. And then when I found out from different people in this circle that worked in the theater and encouraged me, said, oh, you should try and do this, or you should work toward doing that, and so forth. And I was like, is that possible? You know, is that, you know, it's like, oh, we have, you know. So it's a lot of work because there's so many pieces that have to be put together to have, because, you know, the theater ain't cheap.
But also you're involved in every single moment and every single thing, because this is a project. I mean, this feels like these projects are on your own terms now, which I love, right? So this is not a record label telling you what you should and shouldn't be and how to sell records and image and all those things that go with that. But this is you, that you're running the whole thing, right? You're having to create the artwork and you're having to write the scripts and cast the talent, all that stuff. That
is because financially I can't afford to get nobody to do that for me. So it's a good thing in the way that I had to learn how to do it. And I was very fortunate to have people who were in the theater who they have an understanding and an association with the theater world to kind of, okay, this is how they think for this way, and this is how this works for that. They understood that I wasn't going to be going along with how everything was done, but you do need to have an understanding of how the structure of things are. They have to have some level of familiarity for you to work with. And it has turned into, I have to do all of those things in order to get it done the way that I'm hearing it to be done, the way that I'm seeing in my mind that I want it to be done. And if I leave it to somebody else to do it, not that it wouldn't be done well by somebody else or even better by somebody else, but it wouldn't be what it is I'm thinking. It wouldn't be what it is that I'm feeling. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity. It is a 24/7 type of thing. You know, I forget to eat all the time and I have to remind myself, well, people go, you know, you're 5 minutes away from the beach, go and, you know, take it. It's like, oh yeah, let me, get out of this chair.
I've been in for 16 hours composing. Yeah.
No, but it's tough because the theater world is tough. You know, you'd have to make loads of money to earn your keep. Really, everything goes to the creation of it, the production of it, and paying everybody else, you know. Having said that, by the time I had gotten to this point, the industry had gotten to a place where I was doing what the industry wanted, but I wasn't really getting paid anymore that much. So it was like, well, I ain't gonna get paid anyway. Might as well do what I want to do. You know, might as well enjoy and feel inspired by it. And that is what this brings to me. And it is very abstract to a lot of people who because they've yet to see it. You know, I've done bits and pieces. I did K Street Memorial, and it got nominated for Innovation of the Year, Jazz Innovation of the Year. And so there's an awareness of it in the industry type of thing, but it takes so much time and so much money and so much building of it to get it to a place to where more people can see it and you can deliver what it is that you're trying to do. And this blending of what my roots are with futuristic aspects, which is why I call it blended roots. You've got to pulling all of those bits together because I see it as a future thing rather than being a heritage thing as such. You always need tradition, elements of that, because that's what we anchor ourselves on. Everybody has that kind of anchor. And if you don't have some kind of reference, you know, of where you've been, then the whole kind of where you're going type of thing is a bit haphazard, you know. And that's not so bad, but you just kind of need some vision of where you want to go. It's hard. It's hard. And there's no guarantees as there is in any kind of life, but trying to get this kind of stuff off the ground takes a lot. But inspirationally, best I've ever had. It just gives me the opportunity to express exactly without any kind of holes, but, oh, you can't do that because people ain't going to understand. It's like, come on now, really, people ain't going to understand. I don't even get that kind of why people say, you know, people don't, it's just like whatever you put on the shelf in a grocery store or whatever, and people haven't seen it before, they might see 2 or 3 different types of it where they may have only had one before, and they see 2 or 3 different options. Okay, I'll try that and see what that's like. They may not like it, but some might. People are you are people. So to say that people won't get something is a bit short-sighted. But I don't have to worry about that because that's not what I'm going for. People who go to the theater expect the avant-garde.
Let me ask you about the title. So where does that come from?
Meteor opus grio. Meteor is a dead Latin word. It's an old Latin word that means for the better, for the betterment. And a colleague was saying, you know, when I was looking for the next title of this, he said, try to go for one name. And I went for it. And then I tried to to get a website for it, but it was like £3,000 for the name. Okay, that's not going to work. So then I was talking to my son and I was like, well, you know, griot, which is the African storyteller, and opus, referencing the, you know, classical aspect of the opera format type of thing, and how to put those two together. And he was like, oh, okay, well, opus griot sounds good. I was like, actually, that's a really good idea. Meteor opus griot. So that's how the name came together. Quickly went online and grabbed the website, you know, that's where it came from. But it's Meteor is being for the better, and opus for this amount of work, compositions, and griot for the African storyteller. The whole thing about the meteor is that meteor is the name of this seafloor society where this child is thought lost at sea, and she's rescued by a legendary African mermaid or water legend. And she's taught by the mer people to bring harmony to the land dwellers and go back and forth and stuff. So I love that aspect of it because that gives me a whole lot more room to tell the stories. It's human stories still, but I don't have to be in one kind of corner of how I have to say something. I can imagine something and then let people imagine as well.
And this is going to work up to a double album next year, a theatre performance and a film, right?
Yes, because the double album and the filming of the performance of the premiere in Devon, in Plymouth, Devon, there's a Barbican Theatre in Plymouth, and that's where it's premiering in October 2024. And that's when the double album is coming. So I'm aiming at putting out an EP in April or spring, summer 2024 to kind of lead up to it.
Wow. Well, look, we look forward to hearing that so much. I should ask about more recent Paul Weller connections. When would you have last spent time together, whether that was creating music together, performing live?
I know it was 2008. I want to say Brixton Academy, but that might not have been it. It might have been, but it was one of those big theaters in London. But I kind of want to say Brixton Academy. He called me to do some singing with him. And he also I think he did Burning Bridges with me as well. Came in and sang with him and stuff.
How lovely. I bet that was really special because that was one of the 2 co-writes on the album from you and Paul. I'm Gonna Miss You being the other.
Burning Bridges was definitely a co-write. And you can definitely hear the parts that I wrote and the parts that Will wrote just because of the shift in the mood of the parts of the song.
That's brilliant, though, isn't it? Yeah, as songwriters, you can identify is a brilliant thing. Not just the voices or anything like that, but yeah, that's a real...
That's like you could tell who, and when Lennon, I'm not comparing us in any way to that scenario, but when you have 2 songwriters whose identity is definitive of them, you can tell which part they wrote. Even if you didn't know, you go, okay, that sounds like Lennon wrote that part, and it sounds like McCartney wrote that part, type of thing. But yeah, that was 2008. That would have been the last time that I saw him, I think. And for several years after that, my birthday and Nat's birthday is on the same day.
Oh, right.
That was always a kind of running joke, you know. Yeah, well, if you insist on sharing my son's birthday, you know, type of thing. So that continued for a while. But yeah, that was the last time that I saw Paul.
And more recently than that, you would have been down to Black Barn, to Paul Weller's headquarters, his studio in Ripley in Surrey. I know Paul wasn't there, but recorded a few years back now, but a song with Stone Foundation, with the 2 Neils, Neil Jones, Neil Sheasby, and their band.
That Stone Foundation, I think they contacted me directly.
That sounds right, because I think they write the song and they're like, who would be brilliant on this? Okay, let's reach out to them and see if it can happen.
I think they did contact me directly, and maybe they got to me through Reese. The engineer, it was probably through Charles Reese. Obviously, the familiarity to me of their sound to Paul and that kind of soul rock fusion type of thing. And they were very kind, very, very kind. And it was great to be back at Black Barn because I hadn't been there for a while. I think the last time I had been at Black Barn it would have been when Paul and I recorded I Want to Be Where You Are.
Oh, the Michael Jackson song.
Yeah, on my.
I love that version. That is such a good track.
I think that would have been the last time between when I was at Black Barn and
that would have been like 2004 time. By that time, we've had, I should say, folks, we've had songs on the album Illumination. We've had songs on the album Studio 150. We had the live performance of the Riverside Studios in Hammersmith on Studio 150. Would it just be that Paul would ring you up and just go, look, this is what I need, some Carleen magic live or on record?
Yes. You know, it was never anything planned. It was always random. But again, like I said, it was, you know, it's like family. It's like, you know, your brother calls you up and says, I need you to do this. When? Now. You know, you're living on this side of the world and they're on this side of the world, you know. But for the most part, yeah, the only time it was not something I could do is if I was on tour.
I like the fact that what he hears because it's always towards the end of the making of a song in these scenarios we're talking about, right? And what he's hearing is what I'm missing is Carleen. She needs like there's a specific thing that you bring to the party that he needs on a record.
That's very kind of you to say.
It must be, right? Because
I mean, he's been fortunate to have some really good singers over the years. I mean, I based my choice to come to England to work because of DC Lee. I heard her voice on the demos that Marco and Femi had sent me after we first played at the Town and Country. It's called something else now, but it was called Town and Country, Kentish Town. They sent me their demos and I heard Dee's voice. And at the time, it was when America was going into their very kind of machine type delivery of work. The whole, for me, the sound of soul was very watered down.
There's more process, isn't it? It's more packaged.
Yeah. So to hear that, you know, it was very raw with the production of it and stuff was very raw, but Dee's voice was so smooth and obviously influenced with soul. She was bringing that sound in, the sweet soul aspect of it. And that on top of after I had heard just in a day cleaning up the house and had MTV on and heard Karen Wheeler singing Keep On Moving. None of that was happening in the States. None of that type of sound, none of that type of organic type of thing. So yeah, I think that Paul would have found that anyway. I was just right place at the right time. And, I was happy to do it. One, because like I said, I was learning a lot. I was doing something very, very different from what I knew. Rock and roll wasn't what I knew. That kind of rock and roll wasn't what I knew. I knew Chuck Berry rock and roll, and I knew Johnny Cash country and western, that kind of, and I knew the kind of California fusion kind of rock and roll from the late 70s and early 80s. But this was different. It was British rock and roll, and British rock and roll is very, very different from my ear. For what I was used to hearing. And so it was like going to class. And I love being a student. I knew from a long time ago when I first entered college that I was going to be a lifelong student. So I love the whole kind of thing of being called up at the last minute and going, it's like, can I hear it first? And no, just come on down, you.
Thank goodness you liked it. This has been such a delight. I'm going to put so much stuff in the show notes of the performances we talked about when you were part of Paul's band on Jules Holland, and also most importantly stuff about the current project, because that's really important and I want to make sure that people know about that and stuff. But this has been such a delight. I've got 2 final questions for you, Carleen. Okay. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. What would you go with?
I suppose the thing, oh my goodness, I can see the video. I can see the song. You Do Something to Me. That one is like tops for me. One, it's, again, it's a thing that I can't relate to as a story, but to hear him tell that story. And, Weller, as my brother, my experience with him was him being kind, but that's a whole different kind of thing to being that kind of sensitive. And that's very, very different. To hear that kind of thing coming from someone like what Gene was saying, Carleen goes, da, 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 Paul from the, rah, 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 you know what I mean? So You Do Something to Me is a completely different thing. But even people who aren't followers of his style of music, I've been in different type of scenarios where they weren't music people, they weren't theater people or whatever. And, they will have heard, oh, you work with Paul Weller, whatever. So, oh, I love that song, You Do Something to Me.
Hey, look, final question. So the purpose of this podcast, Carleen, I don't know if I've told you this, I have one big regret from my life as a radio presenter. I gave up being a radio presenter over 10 years ago now. And the big regret was that I never got to interview Paul Weller. During lockdown, a bit like yourself with the projects you're on at the minute, during lockdown, we were all twiddling our thumbs, wondering what to do. I created this podcast to make it happen. So if I ever get to interview Paul Weller, what do you think I should ask him?
Oh, my word. What made him choose the guitar that he gave to my son? That was the first guitar my son ever had.
Oh, you have to tell me this story. How did that come about?
When Paul, I think we had been over to the family house. I think he was he with Sam by this time? At any rate, it was Christmas or after Christmas or during that period. And you know how people do in those kind of family scenarios. Everybody does a little bit, sings a little bit after dinner in the front room or whatever. And
I mean, yes, that does happen, but I don't have Paul Weller and Carleen Anderson in my front room. So what's the pity?
And his mom was there, his dad was there, his kids were there and stuff. And if I'm remembering it right, I think this might have been the time when he says to my son, why don't you play a song? And so he's like, well, I don't have a guitar. I think my son was using one of his friend's guitars or whatever. He was just learning to play. And Paul gave him a guitar. I mean, it's a big deal because it's a big deal that, my son still has a guitar up in his studio. He's a music producer now. But I guess, I saw it as a very nice gesture. But what made him give my boy Bobby that particular, because the guy got loads of guitars. I mean, loads. So what made him give him that particular one? Now, I'd have to find out from my son what that one is because I don't know guitars. I suppose that would be my question if I was, in a journalistic type of mode or something. I'd go, so what made you choose that particular guitar? What was the guitar that you gave to Carleen Anderson's son, Bobby?
That's a brilliant question. Oh, I love it. That's so good. Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been such a delight to spend time with you. I look forward to seeing and hearing everything that's coming next. But thank you, Carleen.
Thank you very much, Dan. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Well, that was something really special. My thanks once again to the absolute legend that is Carleen Anderson. Look forward so much to what's to come. If you check out the show notes to this podcast on my website, you'll find all the details on there. You can get involved, and you can also find out details of that back catalogue that we talked about, the recordings with Paul Weller, that co-produced album, Blessed Burden, and much, much more. I've also put up there some videos of the later shows and some of those live gigs that we talked about, Hyde Park, Studio 150, and more. Do check it out. Go online. PaulWellerFanPodcast.com is my website. You'll find the show notes to this episode of the podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd love it if you could get us a virtual coffee. You can head to my store online, sign up just £3, or if you fancy it, you can sign up for a subscription as well. A few mentions of people doing exactly that. Hello to Jen. Hello, Stephen Cartwright. Hello to Stu Burns. Hi to Jane the Jam Tart with a heart. Nick Keane. Hello to Frank, who says, fantastic podcast series, Dan. Magic nuggets in each one. Hello to Roger Clark. Thank you to you for your virtual coffee. If you want to get involved, PaulWellerFanPodcast.com. You can also get in touch on social media at WellerFanPod on X, or just search for Paul Weller Fan Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Do spread the word. Please make sure you share these episodes on your social media channels. It all helps us to find new listeners to the podcast. So anyway, if you're wondering how we follow Carleen Anderson, you're going to love the next episode. Coming up, Dr. Robert from the Blow Monkeys is my very special guest. Make sure you follow, you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, and more. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.